Support for this episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere is made possible by the West Express, the premier publisher of books about Sherlock Holmes and his world. Find them online at westexpress.com.
I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, episode 164, Sherlock Holmes, Popeye, and more.
I hear of Sherlock everywhere since you became astronomer.
In a world where it's always 1895, comes I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, a podcast for devotees of Mr. Sherlock Holmes, the world's first unofficial consulting detective.
I've heard of you before. You're Holmes the meddler, Holmes the busybody, Holmes the Scotland Yard Jack in office.
The game's afoot as we discuss goings-on in the world of Sherlock Holmes enthusiasts, the Baker Street Irregulars, and popular culture related to the great detective.
As we go to press, sensational developments have been reported.
So join your hosts, Scott Monty and Burt Wolder, as they talk about what's new in the world of Sherlock Holmes.
You couldn't have come at a better time!
Welcome to I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast for Sherlock Holmes devotees where it's always 1895. I'm Scott Monty.
I'm Poop Deck Burt Wolder.
Well, blows me down. This is going to be what I perceive to be a very fun and wide-ranging episode. We're going to be talking with Mike McClure, a Sherlockian, a Baker Street Irregular, and a man of multifaceted talents. More on Mike and what to expect from him in just a moment, but a bit of housekeeping before we get into that. The show notes for this episode are available at ihose.co/ihose164. You can leave us feedback or comments about this particular episode at that link. The show notes are available on that page and by simply swiping left across your podcast listening device when you see that cover art. You can reach us on social media at I Hear of Sherlock. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And if you'd like to email us, we are at comment@ihearofsherlock.com. We'd be delighted to hear your voice, as a few folks have done in recent episodes. You can give us a call at 774-221-7323. That's +1 774-221-READ. And leave us a voicemail. If it is something we can use on the air, we will play it so other people can hear your dulcet tones as well. Well, Bert, have you fastened your seatbelt for this one?
Oh, yes. And luckily, I decided to get economy plus seating, so there's a little bit more room here.
Oh, yeah, we definitely need a little more leg room here in the I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere fuselage. So strap yourselves in and get ready for Mike McClure, who is a retired funeral director and a lifelong devotee of the Sherlock Holmes hobby. He's a member of several Midwestern science societies, and he founded the Chester Baskerville Society in 1988. You may have heard us mention Mike's name before because he's the author of Sherlock Holmes and the Cryptic Clues. He's also written The Annotated Speckled Band for first-time readers. He just authored that in 2017. And as you'll hear, Mike's interests and activities have extended to many varied interests in getting children interested in Sherlock Holmes as well. And just this past January, as recognition for that, Mike received the Susan Z. Diamond Beacon Award. Mike's currently working on 3 Sherlockian books slated for release from 2019 through 2021, and he's finalizing the artwork for Sherlock Holmes and the Baker Street Irregulars board game. That's something we're going to get into with him, and as you'll hear, you'll have an opportunity to get involved in a couple of Mike's projects as well. Mike was invested into the Baker Street Irregulars as Stimson and Company in 1992. Mike, welcome to I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here with both of you guys today.
Excellent.
Thank you for the invitation.
Well, we've got a lot to cover with you. You are a multifaceted individual and a fascinating one at that. Well, why don't we start at the beginning, as it were, and if you can tell us a little bit about how you first encountered Sherlock Holmes in your life.
Oh, absolutely. Credit that to my father and Mr. Rathbone. Sunday afternoon cinema, whether it was the Sherlock Holmes series, Charlie Chan, Mr. Moto, Mr. Wong, and of course John Wayne interspersed there. Whenever Dad wasn't working, that was our Sunday afternoon ritual to watch the films, and just absolutely enthralled. I mean, it's this character, which led me, of course, to the books, and then reading the stories and that this larger than life, of course, as we know, borrowing from real life inspirations that inspired me to follow this, I guess, an early passion. It was in the late 80s, I started attending a few of the regional Scion meetings, and they were all an hour plus away, a couple hours away to get to Peoria and that. So, and I had friends I talked, Sherlock up. They were readers too. Decided to start a local group here in Chester so that the friends and neighbors could enjoy it without having to drive so far.
That's
so
great.
The Chester Baskerville Society was born in 1988.
So tell me a little bit about your father. Was he a Sherlock Holmes enthusiast as well?
He was a man of many. His name is Jack, and a jack of all trades. As you crediting me, but quite the man, quite my hero. He had varied interests, but that type of mystery and adventure and that really captured his imagination as well.
And what was the path for you? How did you make the leap from Rathbone and the stories and discover that there were other people with this interest in Sherlockian societies and things?
Well, I was a book nerd, and I hung out at the library every chance that I had, and of course talking to the librarians and that about, there was a film, whichever one, House of Fear, whatever episode it was, something spurred them to say, well, on the shelf over here we have, and there it was. It was I won't call it a career, but a career was born.
That's great.
My path was set for it.
So you mentioned that you're in the Peoria area, specifically Chester, Illinois.
Well, Chester, Illinois is actually an hour south of St. Louis. Peoria winds up being about 3.5-hour drive for me.
Oh, my goodness.
But we would attend the Handsomes of John Clayton. There were some groups over in St. Louis, too, one here in Southern Illinois. We bounced around to different ones. That incredible, if warm fuzzy, if that means anything to you or your listeners, that camaraderie, that instant feeling like you're with family, because there's this common interest, common goal, and of course the grand game that Holmes really existed, as we all know he did. That all, it's a bond that I can't explain other way. It was family that I had to be with, had to be able to visit with and share with. So that's what really, I guess, pushed me to the point where I needed to do something locally for my friends, for my family in the area too, because not everybody could drive that far.
Well, how about professionally? I mean, what do you, or did you do professionally, and did you find any common bond with other people in your profession and Sherlock Holmes?
Oh, absolutely. For anyone that doesn't know, I'm a funeral director. It's my father's profession. Just fell right into the family business. And early, just as I'm getting ready to start the Scion, doing some investigations, talking with Peter Blau, I find that John Bennett Shaw, another bird of the same feather, funeral director. And oh my gosh, now you're in trouble. Now the two of us are together. We'd call and write and discuss things that you don't want to hear on air, but also Sherlockian things. And as things progressed, with my Baskerville Society, we formed what was called Cartwright's Companions. That's kind of our children's group. And we broadened that out, then created Holmes for the Holidays, 5 times a year, a seasonal holiday issue of Sherlockian games and stories and puzzles and things that went out internationally there before we ended there. But as we progressed there, the very next year, formed a group called Stimson and Company. Stimson and Company being the funeral directors there in the only undertaker mentioned, other than the undertaker's mute, the only undertaker mentioned in the canon. And John Bennett Shaw was my chairman of the board, as in stiff as a board, because how we spelled it. That's right. And so we had fun, and we reached out to other funeral directors. Stimson and Company being Stimson for funeral directors, and Company is anyone else interested in the Victorian obsession with mourning and death, or just interested in what we were doing. So we published a journal with all kinds of silliness, and because of that journal, that's why the book that you have, that's Sherlock Holmes and the Cryptic Clues. That's the genesis of it. John wanted me to collect these in a book form, and of course I didn't get that done when he passed, and practically a little over 20 years later, finally put pencil and pen to paper and finished it up.
Yeah. Did you, when obviously when John was still with us, did you have a chance to visit his home and to see his collection?
No. Plenty of pictures and plenty of discussions and that, my phone, but he was always pleading with us. The problem with my profession, though, being a family-based funeral home, we had 2 funeral homes, one in each county, so they weren't even close to each other. It's really tough to get away. So I was really taking vacation time just to even get as far north as Peoria to get away for that length of time. And even at that, it was tough. In the old days, and this may sound counterintuitive, but we had the ambulance service and the funeral home. So, I guess if things were going a little slow, you think we might be driving a little slower to the hospital, but no, that was not the case.
If a patient doesn't make it, you can always reroute them from the hospital to the funeral home. So I understand.
Right. But we have to be careful how you charge there. There's no double dipping. You can't really charge them for. Anyway, I'm sorry. We digress.
I'm trying to be good. I'm trying to sort of self-monitor and self-regulate myself, but I can't resist observing. I can't resist observing that it is such a tough business. People are dying to get in there.
Oh boy.
It's only because they heard about our layaway plan.
It strikes me that there's got to be a sense of macabre humor among the funeral profession. I mean, the book Sherlock Holmes and the Cryptic Clues was a great deal of fun. For those who don't know about it, it's kind of an inside joke kind of thing, because it is the epitaphs and tombstones of members of the Baker Street Irregulars. So it's a limited audience there. But there's a lot of gallows humor. And I have to imagine that it's just human nature, Mike, for individuals who are in this profession to use humor almost as a defense mechanism, as a matter of coping with some of these heavy things that you're dealing with every single day.
Absolutely, especially in smaller towns. Everyone is almost like extended family, whether you like it or not. And you're dealing with these people at their worst time. Humor is a great defense. Unfortunately, a lot of funeral directors go to the bottle, which there's nothing wrong with that. I understand. John Bennett Shaw, he'll affirm that. As far as the Sherlockian meeting, a couple of Sherlockians in a bottle, and you can actually do that one of the Sherlockians if you have to. But
Well, and let's stay on this strain of humor for a moment. Chester, Illinois, is the home of a very famous cartoonist, or at least the famous part is the byproduct of this cartoonist that everyone knows, and that is Popeye. You want to tell us a little bit about the connection of Popeye with Chester and how you've been instrumental in helping to keep that memory green? Spinach green?
Oh, certainly. Certainly. Spinach green. There we go. Thank you. Yes, I mean, you're absolutely right on multiple accounts. so many places they claim to be the home of or the whatever, and sometimes it's a little bit of a strained relationship. The man may have stopped and spent the night. George Washington slept here. I mean, that type of a scenario. But no, Elzie Chrysler Segar is the artist who created Popeye, and he was born December 8th, 1894. 1 year short of a really juicy year for us. But anyway, for 1894, and he was, he grew up. It was the environs here, the people that he met and dealt with day to day. Those are people that he incorporated into the strip. Popeye, Olive, Wimpy, Coal Oil, Olive's father, Popeye's father, Pappy. Those are all real people that lived here in Chester. So when you talk about the home of something, Segar was born here. He just to give you an idea of his early career. He worked at the Opera House that William Windy Bill Schuckert operated, and Windy Bill winds up being the inspiration for Wimpy. Not very much of a compliment, but what Mr. Schuckert did was he paid for art classes for Segar, and that launched his career. He moved from Chester to Chicago to New York and eventually out to California, working with Hearst at that time, Hearst Syndicate. But what he would do at the Opera House, of course, in the day of the vaudevillian acts, and then they went to the silent films, he would play the trap, the drums, but then he would also run the projector once they got into the large reels. And while the reels were rewinding on the machine, he would flash up on the screen some of his artwork. And he would take a businessman or someone from town, more of a caricature, and throw it up there. The town folk loved it. It was just so humorous. I mean, he had that wit, that satire already at a very, very young age. Mr. Schuckert saw that talent, and that's why he promoted that. Lost a good worker, but sent him off to his future career there. But Popeye, Rocky Fiegel was his name, Frank Rocky Fiegel. He was a general laborer that basically was kind of the cock of the walk. He was a nice enough guy, but you didn't mess with him. Other towns, neighboring towns, would send their tough guys over to challenge him. And one of the stories, there's 3 of them that came over from Sparta, just about 20 miles away from us. 3 came over, and Rocky went off to the woods with him. And he came back and sat down in his regular chair, kicked back against the tavern, and proceeded to take a nap again. The other 3 went off to seek medical help. He was just that type of a guy, extremely strong. There's a couple of brothers. Rocky worked for their father on the farm, and they remember he would be down on the ground. He would grab the bales of hay, the large bales of hay, and toss those on up in the wagon. But it took 2 men in the wagon just to reposition them. So he was the real deal. No spinach, but I've got a picture. In fact, I need to change my website just a little bit to add these real people to it. Right now, I'm kind of jumping ahead here, sorry, but about the Popeye and Friends character trail. I'll have more of this available on our website so people can see what we're talking about. But Olive Oil was absolutely string bean, straight-laced, hair in a bun, rather strict shopkeeper. And Coal Oil, the patriarch of the town, Olive's father, Coal Oil, the Cole family. It was Charles Briggs Cole was his name. And then Poop Deck Pappy was Segar's own father, Elzie Segar. But when you see the images, when you see these, it's stunning.
That's great.
So absolutely, it's the home of Popeye.
Now Mike, I don't know if you're aware of this trivia question. You probably are, being as close to the center of the Popeye universe as you are. Do you know Olive Oil's official measurements?
I can't talk about a lady's weight, nor her.
I don't know her weight, but her measurements were given as 19, 19, 19.
Yes, that's in Bud Sagendorf's book, right?
I love that.
Yes.
This is a digression from Sherlock Holmes, but this is the first I hear that there were real people who were the inspiration for Popeye and that community. So how was that discovered?
Everyone knew about it even at the time when Segar was still living and drawing. This Rocky Fiegel I mentioned, he received checks from Fiegel as not really, of course, back then there were no releases. There were, the legality of anything like this. But Fiegel was I hate to even say paycheck to paycheck kind of guy, but yeah, he needed the assistance. So, the businessmen that were still living years ago that I've even spoken with remembered seeing the checks from there. Of course, unfortunately for Mr. Shurkert's sake, the resemblance is beyond any question. One of his other duties I didn't mention for Segar was when there was just a little bit of a lull there at the Opera House, he had to run out to the couple different taverns to constantly pick up hamburgers for Windy Bill. So we're not talking just physical.
It's amazing. That really is amazing.
I love it. I'm interested in this character trail. This is one of these hidden gems of Americana, and there is a tie-in to Sherlock Holmes here that came in 2009, and there's going to be one in the future. So why don't we start with how the character trail got there, and about this connection in 2009.
Certainly. It started with the Popeye statue that we put up back in 1977. Created a little Segar Park, Segal Memorial Park, put a bronzed image of Popeye, and that was back when Bud Sagendorf, the last, I don't want to say the last artist, the one that was really still carrying the strip in a daily format. And then once he passed, then in 1994, it went to just nothing but repeats of his in the daily. In 1994, the strip went to strictly original Sunday columns, and Hy Eisman is the man that shepherds Popeye currently, keeps him alive in all the newspapers. But from 1977 on, we only had the one Popeye statue, and he's down on the river. There's a bridge that connects Illinois to Missouri, our Chester Bridge. So it's a romantic spot. The sailor guards the town, looks out over the waterfront where Segar saw the paddle wheel boats back and forth. The inspiration for a sailor, the need for somebody to guide a boat, a captain. But as we get closer to our time, there's a little bit of a civil war brewing here in Chester. And the people were realizing that Popeye on the perimeter of our city, people were coming in to see him and out, just in and out. They weren't really getting into the city interior at all. No real tourism effect. And the few people that knew about it, again, is the problem. So as things were waning, they thought, how about moving the statue into basically next to the Opera House that still exists. It's been reskinned. It's Spinach Can Collectibles. It's a gift store now. And the tavern where he used to get his hamburgers from, that is now just a small park. So they wanted to move, some folks wanted to move the statue into town. Well, of course, there's plenty others who raised the money, put him where they wanted him, and they wanted him to stay there. So again, there's this, and these are I have friends on both sides of this. And again, when you're looking at this, both have merit. I understand where each are coming from. And so I woke up one morning. I don't often dream of Popeye. But I woke up one morning with oh my gosh, Segar, he created so many characters. Let's just put up another statue. So I shocked my wife with the news and went out, and within just a couple of days had the funding for it and got it on order. And there in 2006, we erected our first, it was Wimpy, obviously, Wimpy, right next to the Opera House in the lot where the hamburgers were purchased. And each year, we have a Popeye picnic. It's always the weekend after Labor Day. And so every Popeye picnic now, we've unveiled another statue. Some have had multiple characters on it. So we have 22 characters to date. And what you'd mentioned there, Scott, in 2009, castor oil. Castor oil was olive oil's brother. I guess I should add in here that olive oil predates Popeye by almost 10 years. Olive and her family, Elzie Segar, he created a thing called Thimble Theater. And he had these little, very much like almost just glorified stick figures that were people. It was Olive, it was her boyfriend Ham Gravy, or other characters, but they were playing another role. It's a throwback to his vaudevillian days. I mean, he sees people, an actor playing somebody up on stage. So he gave these little people personas, but they were actors playing out another role. It's a gag a day series, so every week, every day, there was a different, there was no continuity to it. It was just something different every single day. And the Thimble Theater started in 1919, And it wasn't until 1929 until Popeye actually is written into the script. But so you've got olive oil, her father coal oil, her mother Nana, her Nana oil, the brother castor oil, and then you've got the uncle lubricant oil, you got cylinder oil, a cousin. It just, the oil family is what this really worked around. Well, castor oil, of course, as we know, or some people can remember the nasty medicine aspect of it. Our city was actually really, our region, not just our city, but several of the towns here, but we were considered the castor oil capital of America, if you can believe that. The mayor had bought the beans, and he taught the farmers how to sow, and then he set up the presses, because castor oil was the lubricant until, petroleum and others were developed. So we have, of course, the river, we had the railroad, we were just perfect, for shipping. So we were really, that was the big production there. Segar's grandfather was in the castor oil business as well. So that's how we see the development of this.
Yeah. Well, let me
researching.
Yeah, let me just sort of interrupt you for a second, because I'm really curious about this. So since this was, the early part of the 20th century, are there any Popeye and Sherlock crossovers? I mean, did Popeye must have gotten involved in with a detective in one of the strips?
My dear Bert, I was getting to that.
Sure you were.
Let's see, how long do you have? Because it's incredible. Segar was incredibly passionate about Sherlock Holmes. I should say Conan Doyle's works, but what we see the indication of was Sherlock Holmes was the man. In the very beginning of his strip, I mentioned Ham Gravy. Harold Ham Gravy was Olive's first boyfriend. No, it's just a few strips into it. Here is old Ham Gravy wearing the deerstalker, got the pipe. He's out. He's a detective. He's going to be a detective, and he's running back and forth. In fact, one of the strips, again, these were fairly gag a day, but this is where Segar's starting a little bit of continuity to a persona being developed in a particular character. So with Ham Gravy out there, he's putting on his disguise. He's got to go over and help Olive's father because he has a problem. So he puts on his disguise. He hits the road. He says, "I'm going to make a bum out of that Sherlock Holmes." Of course, indicating, paying homage to Holmes's disguises. So that ran. But Segar created Murloc Jones, Hancock Holmes, Hotfoot the detective, all these different characters in the short span. I need to add here that Segar died when he was 43 years old. So when he created Thimble Theater, almost 10 years later, Popeye gets written into it. Popeye is another maybe 9 years of his life, and Segar's gone. Someone else shepherded Popeye all the way to the one that and the rest of the people have seen, the cartoons, the films. Those
Fleischer.
are totally different people. That's a whole he can turn into a boat and a plane or whatever. No, that's somebody else's imagination. Segar created him as a human being, but more importantly for our sakes, is Popeye was a throwaway. I mean, that's what Segar did. He wrote people in and out of the strip to keep it fresh. Popeye came in, served his purpose. He tossed him away, and the public went nuts. No, you got to bring the sailor back. Well, when the sailor comes back, he and Castor Oil, as I mentioned, they form a detective agency.
Well, the interesting, let me just stop you for a second. I mean, the interesting thing is that thanks to modern technology, somewhere, I mean, I'm a big fan of early comics, and somewhere I have a large format book, and I know there was a series of them. So I think I have the first volume or the second volume or something where they began reprinting Thimble Theater and Popeye. And I'm sure you must have a complete run of all these things.
Sure. And what they'll do, they'll start with 1929 when what happened, Castor Oil, he got this magical whiffle hen. So he was going to go over to Dice Island and become a millionaire, right? Well, yeah, you rub the hen long enough and you get this magic, right? And so they needed a sailor. They go down to the dock and there's this scruffy-looking one-eyed old dog standing there. And he says, "Hey, are you a sailor?" And Popeye says, "Do you think I'm a cowboy?"
Yeah.
So off it was launched.
Yeah. It's interesting, the crossovers here. I mean, the Baker Street Journal has run for decades and decades cartoons about Sherlock Holmes. And so cartooning and illustration, Frederick Dorsteel, the comics, Popeye and Sherlock, talking to Scott Bond, who did a lot of those cartoons, one of his early inspirations as a cartoonist and an illustrator was Carl Barks, who was a famous illustrator with the Disney shop and did, I think a lot of long form Disney comics in the 30s or 40s. But this sort of gets us to, back to your statues and the commemoration. You're also involved in a Sherlock statue, aren't you?
Right. The one that Scott had mentioned in 2009 was castor oil with deerstalker, Inverness cape. We didn't use the pipe. We used the magnifying glass because it went out in front of our Memorial Hospital. So smoking, hated to be sans pipe, but you do what you got to do. They liked the idea of castor oil being a medication back when. That was kind of a nice tie-in for them. But they also see it as investigating the cause of diseases and that. But castor oil, right before Segar's death, I mean, we're talking just days before his last strips that he created, he brings castor oil back. Castor oil was a full-fledged Sherlock Holmes as well. But castor oil, the detective, reappears for a final kind of like goodbye, and then Segar passes. It was leukemia and liver disease, but he worked up basically right to the very end. But all of these other names I gave you, these are Sherlock Holmes. The deerstalker, the whole bit. Many of them keep paying homage back to him being a disguise artist. That was kind of one of the I don't know, that inspired him. But I do need to tell you a little tidbit that I discovered since all this. This is stuff that I've known, through the research and all for some time. Segar, I'm just going to say it, he wasn't the best of artists. Okay, his artwork was rather crude compared to others that were sharing those newspaper pages with him. But his satire and his wit was above par. He had funny strips while the others had better art but were rather bland in storytelling. So that's what really set him apart. And to keep himself sharp, he was a young man during all of this. During the early parts especially. He would read up Hearst, if you want to say Hearst Entertainment as they are now, it's Hearst Syndicate back then. Of course, they had all the other competitor magazines available. And so he was an avid reader to keep current on what to play with, what to tweak and that. He came across, it's almost too good to not be true. Let me say that. He came across a parody that they were, of course, Conan Doyle's works were very popular, and people would write some kind of a satirical or a parody of the stories. If they were too close, Conan Doyle and then his estate afterwards would pursue them, or to sue them to stop them from doing so. And there's one that was called Round the Pink Pillbox. And of course, that would refer to Round the Red Lamp, the medical mysteries per se that Conan Doyle wrote. But Round the Pink Pillbox basically has a Watsonian doctor kind of stepping up his game and becoming a Sherlock sleuthy within the medical field there. But what the key is, it was written, the author's name, they would call themselves Donan Coyle. They would parody. This one, the name was Castor Oil. O-Y-L-E. Castor Oil. And now this predates Thimble Theater. And I can just see our buddy, our hometown hero, right? Castor Oil. Well, my grandparents, they were in the castor oil business. Castor oil. Castor. Olive oil. Coal. Oh man, coal back home. Coal oil. Yeah. Oh, olive oil. Let's see. Okay. Nana oil, because that means crazy. Banana oil back then was a very common phrase for you're loony. And so Nana oil is Olive's mother. And just on you go. I mentioned some of those others before. You could just see him make a list and now start working these into his new Thimble Theater. And sure enough, in and out they came. So it's very, very, very possible that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle is the reason we have the Oil family to begin with in Thimble Theater.
That's amazing.
It's the spelling of it.
It's amazing.
It's the spelling. It's nuts. But like I said, that one I don't have verbal proof, written proof. That just happens to be too close to be to not be a fact.
Sure.
Well, you've also answered a question for me. It's really interesting, the paths of these sorts of conversations about banana oil. There's a song that Fred Astaire, I think, and his sister Adele used to do, and other people used to do, called "The Babbitt and the Bromide," and it's it's sort of a witty song between a man and a woman, and I think it goes back to the 1920s, and it reflected popular culture at the time. And there's a line in that song where I think the woman says to the man, banana oil. And I never understood what that was supposed to mean. So the idea, this is sort of like an annotated Sherlock Holmes, in terms of finding these little phrases and figuring out what they really mean. So the idea that means crazy is new to me. That's really something.
It was so popular that there was even a little cartoon series called Banana Oil. And it was just, it was a couple frames, a couple panels, and something ludicrous would happen. And whoever the character in the strip would do one of those, almost like a spit take and thrown off their feet and go, banana oil, just like it was shock, like, some other expletive you could add in there, The trail, I do have to mention before I get to what our current plans are, which you're alluding to, the Popeye and Friends character trail. The statues, it's not just castor oil that has something Sherlockian. I have hidden things, little Sherlockian Easter eggs throughout the trail. Coal oil, Allah's father, he's down at the Chester Library, and there's a stack of books. And Shakespeare and Longfellow have cameos engraved into the exterior of the library. So I have Shakespeare and Longfellow's books, but there's a third book on top. And it has the initials A.C. Doyle written on the spine. Yeah. But it's above your eye level. So if you hold your camera up or have somebody hoist you up, the top is a full-fledged carving of the Hound of the Baskervilles, with the hound and all present. So this is a little bit of a shout out to my man back in the. I'm trying to remember which year was which, and I guess it really doesn't matter at this point, but we did Poop Deck Pappy and Popeye's father. And if you knew Robert Burr, or if you know of him, I don't know.
Bob Burr, he was the Rascally Lascar in the BSI, right?
That's the man, or the Rascally Lascar. As you know, he never traveled.
Right.
And so the joke was, we made up a picture of him, two-dimensional, and called him Robbie Burr. And so then he traveled with us. When we went to my very first Baker Street Irregular meeting, my first invitation in 1990, I went with Gordon Speck and Bill Cochran. And being the rookie in the group, they let me shepherd this plexiglass-framed Robbie Burr. Well, lo and behold, I didn't know, but Robbie Burr was due to be invested. Not Robert. Robert already was. Robbie Burr was going to receive an investiture. I had to be his body double. So I walked up with the frame in front of my face, nervous as all get out, not know what in the world's going on. Yeah, I've never been to one of these meetings to begin with. Is this what happened? This is the awkward initiation, but whatever. We came up, and Tom Sticks was Wiggins at that time. He invested Robbie into the Baker Street Irregulars. And his investiture, I think the first and only, and his investiture was the trap door. Nice. So after Bob passed away, we erected Poop Deck Pappy. I think it was in 2013. And I did a tribute to him, to the real man and the Rascally Lascar on the front on the base of the statue. But on Poop Deck's posterior, there is a trap door with buttons. And between the buttons, that emergency escape hatch that every sailor needs, between the buttons, I put the initials RB-BSI. So both ends of the man are covered on that one.
Nice. That's great.
Here in the ancient Anglo-Saxon kingdom of Wessex, we are preparing our traditional St. Patrick's Day festival. Each year, we arm our citizens to combat witches and druids, and then turn all our walking sticks into trees. We love honoring history. And that's why you need your copy of 70 Years by Gaslamp, the illustrious client's 6th casebook, edited by Mary Ann Bradley, Louise Haskell, and Melanie Hoffman. Its 257 pages span 70 years of the history of the illustrious clients of Indianapolis. And it's available right now from our WesExpress.com. Friends, it's March. Dear March, how are you? And the rest, Did you leave nature well? Oh, March, come right upstairs with me. I have so much to tell. If she could, even Emily Dickinson would reach for the pleasure only a volume from the Wessex Press can provide. Choose yours today.
So take us up now to 2019 and the plans that are afoot with regard to Sherlock Holmes and how this fits into the whole Popeye character trail.
Oh, certainly. As I said, each picnic we erect and unveil the statue during the picnic in September. We do have one that was already scheduled for this year, Popeye's Pups, and that'll be at the firehouse. So in September, we're doing the firehouse, but this also is the 125th anniversary of Elzie Segar's his birth here in Chester, and we couldn't really let that pass. So we investigated different places around town, found property. What we're going to do, we're going to put a life-size statue, and you can say it's Elzie Segar because it'll have his face that very much resembles Study in Scarlet, the early illustrations of Holmes in Study in Scarlet. But it'll be Elzie Segar's face, but since Elzie needed clothing, we're going to put him in his Sherlockian gear. It'll be a shout-out to his I didn't mention that, I'm sorry. Right before he died, he was working on a standalone strip. This was not a Popeye add-on. This was a standalone comic strip that was going to be a Sherlockian character for Hearst Syndicate. And he passed before he got it done. And so then Hearst also passed on the opportunity because with the author gone, he was pretty much a superstar. I mean, Segar was earning big bucks. This Bud Sagendorf that I mentioned, he was his assistant at that time. He remembers all. He's the one that told me all these different things. But none of that ever came to light. The family tossed a lot of that stuff because back then, collectibles, as we were talking about before the show, that just, the things we would just, we would love to have, even just to see, have it archived someplace. No, they just pitched it all. Didn't see any value in it. But so we missed out on a Sherlockian cartoon strip because Segar passed too young. So this is a shout out to Segar, basically his unfinished work. So we wanted a Sherlock statue. He needed a face. Segar needed some clothes. Hey, perfect marriage. What is the statue and then the wall behind him? And I don't know if you've seen on our website, if you go to the Popeye Trail side of it, there's an image there. I know, or under our Sherlock tab, there is also. We have a sketch. The Sherlock will be standing there holding a newspaper, and the newspaper is the Times, but it'll be announcing Elzie Segar's birth on December 8th, 1894. Behind him is a wall, looks like a stone wall. It'll have Rocca splashed across the upper left as you're viewing. On the right side, we'll have the Bodymaster's tattoo etched in there. Also the 4 little crosses, the sign of the 4, and there'll be the hound prints in between his feet. So all 4 novels are going to be represented on the wall and the statue together. They'll stand on a circular pad and the kind of a tapered sidewalk that comes in. So if you, in the future, once they update Google Maps, if you come to Chester and you come in near your sky view, you'll see a magnifying glass. You'll be able to spot the statue from the sky and zoom right on in where this stands. Around the perimeter of this circle pad, though, we're going to have granite blocks, and each one is going to have the name of one of the adventures of Sherlock Holmes. I mean, all 60 stories will be named there. And what we're offering is science societies, Sherlockians of interest, whatever, they can go ahead and sponsor those around the circle there. They just would need to get in touch with me as soon as possible because obviously, first come, first serve in a case like that.
That's great. So if people want to get in touch with you, should we just send them to your email? Is that the best way to do that, or is there a...
Right. Yeah, the Watson email would be the best.
Okay.
That comes directly to me. I check that multiple times a day, so they don't have to worry about somebody beating them and getting out of order.
Sure.
I'll definitely be able to handle whatever they need there.
We'll make sure we know.
We're trying to give it the tender, loving care that it deserves. A nice, and it's going to be the first permanent statue that we know of in the Americas. There's a bronze one down in Oklahoma, Edmond, Oklahoma. It moves around. They had it out in a park for a little bit, but now it's inside their new police station there in Edmond. but it's not permanent by any means. It's it can be moved around. This is carved in granite, permanently installed in place, given the tender loving care it deserves.
That's wonderful. That's really great. Well, we'll look forward to more updates on that. Now, Mike, I wanted to close with one last thing, and this kind of gets back to something you mentioned in the beginning of our conversation, where you had been interested in children and their interest in Sherlock Holmes. That's why you created Holmes for the Holidays with puzzles and games and whatnot. It's why you created the Cartwright's Companions as a kind of a sub-society of the Chester Baskervilles. Tell us a little bit about this Sherlock Holmes game that you're working on now.
It's something that my son, Michael, so you don't get confused, it's Michael, and his name's Michael. We're working on together. We just launched a game in December, has to do with zombies, and kind of cut our teeth on that one. Got the bigger board game experience under our belt, and so we knew what we were doing. Sherlock Holmes and the Baker Street Irregulars is the name of the game that we're putting together. It involves sending out the irregulars to collect evidence, and then the evidence you collect will help you arrest villains from the cases. And then once you get a number of villains, you've obviously not only won the game, but you've won Sherlock Holmes' respect, which is tough because you are playing as Inspector Lestrade, Gregson. You're part of the regular force trying to, Holmes has lent you his little irregulars. And just as a sidebar, the irregulars, what we're talking about are little circular tokens that we're going to etch or more of a sketch of young children in appropriate garb for the era. Again, we're extending that out to Scions and Sherlockians. If you have children, if you have grandchildren that would be interested in being a part of the game, there's no cost involved whatsoever. Again, the same email to contact us. You have to sign a release. The image, any photos sent, basically it's the eyes, nose, mouth. The essence of that face will be used. And the artist that we're using, she's stunning. I mean, as far as, it's not the one that we used for the Cryptic Clues book. It's a different one. It's stunning representation. But again, it will be reduced to eyes, nose, mouth, shape of face. Maybe a little bit of the hair would be seen. So it's not an actual photograph reproduction. The child's name won't be included on that chip. So there's no privacy invasion. There's nothing that, there's a lot of trepidation in sharing anything, youth related. Sure. In this case, it would just be a chance for a child to have a little piece of immortality and be a part of the game. Now, I only have 60 slots, so as soon as those are filled, then the offer is off the table. But the artwork, I think, Scott, did you receive an image that I sent you?
Yeah, and we've got that in the show notes, the Colonel Moran card there. Very detailed, very fascinating. A couple of icons there to kind of identify who he is as well. I think it's really well done. I'm looking forward to seeing the entire set put together. And, what a wonderful way for Sherlockians to pay tribute to those in their life that they love, whether the kids turn out to be Sherlockians themselves or not. It's a wonderful way to just kind of memorialize them in this game.
So what we're doing, we're driving it to the original, the Sidney Paget drawings, illustrations, the sketches. Our artist is fleshing them out.
Nice.
So we're not making anybody look like Jeremy Brett or Rathbone. They're going to be right out of the canon. The quotes are out of the canon. So it is a bit of an educational piece.
That's great.
Kind of how you introduce this to me. That's exactly what it's for. Young and old alike can play the game. But as they're playing the game, the locations, the clues, the different things that we have worked into it, the villains, hopefully that will, if they're not Sherlockians, it just might influence them like my dad and Rathbone did when I was. Yeah,
that's great. Now, do you have any plans for the proceeds from this venture?
Yes, for that, as was for my book sales as well. I was kind of splitting up between the Baker Street Trust and then also going to be the Beacon Society.
Oh, that's wonderful.
It was. Again, none of us. I don't think there's a Sherlockian out there that does any of this thinking they're going to make $1. It's a very niche market, right?
Absolutely.
So, but to get it into as many hands as possible. Same for Holmes for the Holidays. As I said, an international subscription list, but I always wondered how many subscribers are really the young people,
right?
And how many were just collectors putting it up on their shelf. But that's what it is.
That's great.
I do know Shannon Carlisle does use those in her class curriculum.
Yeah, we talked to Shannon earlier. I think it was on episode 134 about her activities in her classroom and the whole junior Sherlockian movement. And, of course, that's all linked up to the Beacon Society as well. So it's wonderful to hear so many people and their interest in bringing Sherlock Holmes to young people. It's really what will continue or help further this hobby. Well, Mike, this has been fantastic. I mean, from Popeye to the goings-on in Chester, the statues, the games, the books. I mean, you are a one-man machine, it seems like. And if folks would like to get more information, they can go to BaskervilleProductions.com. That's where Mike has information about all of his activities and ways for you to get involved and to send Mike information as well. Mike, this has been a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, absolutely. Thank you so much again for including me in your show. And I have to thank you both for your dedication to Sherlock Holmes and the Grand Game. You guys need to keep up the great work.
Oh, well, thank you very much.
I had no idea about I had no idea about virtually everything that Mike talked about, and in particular, and I still have a lot of questions. You know, for example, what is really required to erect all of this statuary? I mean, it would seem to me that it would, require just sort of massive amounts of, funding and discussion and review with planning committees and things like that. But I also had certainly no idea about the early history of Popeye. And like Mike, I'm also very interested in illustration and cartooning, and I've always been a Popeye fan. In fact, I've got some of those reprints of those early strips, but who knew? This is a whole other world in Chester, Illinois.
I know. It's amazing. And I guess this is the 90th anniversary of Popeye this year. And Mike certainly has firsthand knowledge of all of that and of how to get these statues erected. I suppose it's a good thing that it's happening in a small town because perhaps there are fewer hurdles to overcome, and Mike seems to have a pretty well-oiled machine at this point. Sorry. Clearly the opportunity there, you talked about funding. The opportunity is there for folks to get involved with sponsorship. There will be areas at the base of the statues where names and entities can be carved in there. So that's probably where some of the funding comes from to make these initiatives possible. Well, speaking of possible, we always like to hear from our friend Matthias Bostrom and see what it's possible to find in the newspapers.
The press is a very valuable institution if one knows how to use it.
Read all about it. Telegram! Westminster murder! Read all about it. Telegram! Read all about it. Westminster murder!
I must make something of it, although I've no doubt that every newspaper in London will be on the street with a full and detailed account.
As we go to press, sensational developments have been reported.
This is As We Go to Press with Matthias Bostrom. I like to pick a random date from Sherlockian history and read whatever newspaper articles I find from that day. It's a different way of approaching the everlasting popularity of Sherlock Holmes, because it leads me to unknown places and unforeseen facts. Most interestingly, it shows me what people actually felt about Sherlock Holmes. at a given time. This time our random date generator has given us November 25, 1920. And I searched the newspaper archives and found a short notice in the South Dakota newspaper, the Daily Argus Leader. I'll read it to you. It's quite short. Colonel Butcher, and I have no idea who Colonel Butcher is, but Colonel Butcher relates that the average reader who patronizes the New York Public Library prefers Conan Doyle's detective stories to any others. Quite naturally, there is more artistry in Poe, and the tales about the Frenchman Arsène Lupin are 10 times more ingenious than Doyle's. But Doyle has infused the adventures of Sherlock Holmes with the indefinable something known as romance, and that has preserved them. The great majority of detective stories are merely ingenious. And that was the short little article. It's interesting to see how Sherlock Holmes survived in a new century, a different society, after the Great War. So many other things changed, but Sherlock Holmes still meant something to people. But the continued Sherlock Holmes success had a lot to do with the films, especially the first really widespread Sherlock Holmes film, the one with John Barrymore from 1922, which was marketed as the first real Sherlock Holmes film, forgetting about all the previous ones. And there were also the British ones with Eileen Norwood. Otherwise, the competition from Agatha Christie and others might have made Sherlock Holmes more and more forgotten. It's interesting to look at the popularity of Sherlock Holmes in different times of the 20th century. I think we'll get back to that in a later episode.
Well, there you have it. Sherlock Holmes through the ages. You know, we see this waxing and waning of popularity, and how the other instances of Sherlock Holmes and other media influence people going back to the books more and more.
Yeah. Well, it's worth reinforcing and sort of underscoring the fact that it's thanks to digital technology. And so it's an occurrence, an event, a characteristic of, these last years, that this forgotten body of information about what people felt about characters like Sherlock Holmes over the years has suddenly become available, that you can now go back and look at this, particular date, this particular observation. And, it also gives you something to think about when you think about how journalism and commentary and essays have changed. So,
yeah,
lots of fodder for academics.
Indeed. I like going back into the archives of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere on the website, and just looking through some of the articles that we wrote. Wow, over the course of the last, I guess it's been 13 years or so, 14 years. So there's plenty of material, over 1,000 entries there to look through. And some of them hold up pretty well. Others are very much placed in a time capsule, if you will. So
How are we coming with the encyclopedia project? The project of, printing and laying out and binding into books all of those entries. How's that coming?
It's slow going, as you can imagine. I've hired a copy editor, a fellow by the name of Wilson, Jabez Wilson. And he keeps complaining that he needs new suits because the cuffs on his suits are getting too shiny. So we don't have the budget for that, I'm afraid. So we may have to we have to shut down without notice someday.
Well, the other problem, I don't know quite how to break this to him. The other problem is, though, as he's aging, he's no longer going to be qualified for the redheaded league.
Well, maybe we'll change to the bald-headed league. That'll be pretty. That would have made an interesting story if Conan Doyle went with the bald-headed league, because You could have had instances of men shaving their heads or putting on bald caps, or would have been something worthwhile.
Well, that was the first draft. That's why none of Conan Doyle's earlier drafts are available. You know, he did a lot of this sort of scribbling, and it's only the final products that really sort of made it. But
well, it's interesting. We may have a guest on in a future episode that actually helps us explore some of that. So stay tuned. Well, that music, of course, means that it is once again time for everyone's favorite Sherlockian quiz show, Canonical Couplets. This is where we give you a couple of lines of poetry, and you need to divine exactly which story it is that we're referring to. The last time around, you may recall, we gave you this clue. Here, Greek meets Greek. One might append, and how? And here, Big Brother Mycroft makes his bow. Bert, do you know which story we were referring to in this case?
Yes, of course. That was, the Greek reference sort of gives it away. That was the moussaka ritual, wasn't it?
Opa! No, you're very close. It was the Greek interpreter.
Oh,
Greek interpreter. Yeah.
One of these days I'll get this right.
I know. Well, the moussaka ritual, that's the one where there was a butler named Socrates. So, or Isosceles. I've always wanted to have a Greek friend who named his kid Isosceles.
Oh, but boy, what unhappy love affairs that poor child with.
Yeah, but they'd be equidistant.
Yeah, but
anyway.
Gee.
Well, we do have a winner in this case. We had a lot of entries, as you can imagine. We stumped nearly everyone on the previous episode, but in this case, we made it super easy, so we had a large number of entries. So we're going to spin the big prize wheel here. Random number generator. Round and round she goes, and looks like it's stopping on number 27. Number 27, and that corresponds to Christopher Cruz. Christopher, congratulations. We will be in touch with you and let you know how you can claim your prize. Excellent. Well, that means it is once again time for the latest entry in Canonical Couplets. Are you ready? All right, here we go. More than the yard, plus Pinkertons could handle, was solved by Sherlock with a lighted candle. If you think you know the answer to this, send it in an email to comment@ihearofsherlock.com with the subject line Canonical Couplets. If you are among the correct answers, we may choose your name for a prize. Good luck. Well, I can't believe we've done it again. I mean, we're here at the end of another episode. Is there anything else that you'd like to draw my attention to, Bert?
That is precisely what you may expect to see when I follow you.
Well, in that case, I am the heavily followed Scott Monty.
And I'm the completely ignored Bert Wolder.
Oh. And together we say, The game's afoot.
The game's afoot. I'm afraid that in the pleasure of this conversation, I am neglecting business of importance, which awaits me elsewhere.
Thank you for listening. Please be sure to join us again for the next episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast dedicated to Sherlock Holmes.
Goodbye, and good luck, and believe me to be, my dear fellow, very sincerely yours, Sherlock Holmes.
And for our more astute listeners, you are one since you've gotten this far, you may have realized that This episode was also brought to you by Bert's faulty microphone cord. That's right, Bert's faulty microphone cord, making noise in our podcast since at least episode 119. If you'd like to hear this go away, make sure you become a patron and donate to us either via PayPal or Patreon so we can afford to get Bert some new equipment.